At 65 years old, gospel legend Shirley Caesar has finally broken her silence, and what she confessed about her rumored feud with evangelist Juanita Bynum has left the entire gospel world stunned. For years, whispers of jealousy, betrayal, and behind-the-scenes drama have circled these two powerhouse women of faith. But now, Shirley herself has stepped forward with revelations that no one saw coming, pulling back the curtain on one of gospel's most talked about rivalries. Shirley Caesar's shocking words have finally confirmed what fans have only whispered about for years. What could possibly tear apart two of the most powerful women in gospel ministry? And why is she choosing to break her silence now, after decades of keeping quiet? Stay tuned, because the truth isn't just dramatic, it's deeply personal and far more explosive than anyone ever imagined. For decades, Shirley Caesar and Juanita Bynum have reigned as towering figures in gospel music and ministry. Caesar, honored as the First Lady of Gospel, has spent more than 60 years shaping the sound of worship and inspiring millions with her voice of faith. Meanwhile, Juanita Bynum emerged as a prophetic powerhouse in the late 90s and early 2000s, captivating audiences worldwide through fiery sermons, best-selling books, and unforgettable worship moments. But behind the stages, cameras, and gospel glamour, one haunting question has never gone away. What really happened between these two legends? What actually transpired between Juanita Bynum and Shirley Caesar? What caused their formerly cordial friendship to allegedly deteriorate? And why has Shirley Caesar decided to speak up now, after being silent for years? We're going into great detail in today's video. We'll learn how this rift started, examine the incidents that stoked rumors, and disclose Shirley Caesar's shocking comment that has gospel lovers worldwide talking. You'll learn about the fan reactions, the cultural influence, and the reasons this narrative is about more than just two gospel leaders. It concerns influence, legacy, and the frequently unseen conflicts that exist inside the church community. Therefore, be sure to watch through to the very end, since Shirley Caesar's revelation on her tense relationship with Juanita Bynum is not only tragic, but also serves as a reminder that even the most devout people can have everyday difficulties. And I promise you won't want to miss this story's surprising conclusion. We must first go back in time and examine how Shirley Caesar and Juanita Bynum's paths even crossed in the gospel world in order to fully comprehend this schism. Juanita Bynum wasn't even well known when Shirley Caesar started her career. Shirley Caesar was already a Grammy-winning musician, a minister, a revered elder in the gospel music industry, and an icon by the time Bynum began making appearances on national stages in the late 1990s. Younger singers and preachers frequently looked up to her as a role model because of her unparalleled influence. In contrast, Juanita Bynum's impassioned preaching, moving tales, and audacious statements generated a whole different kind of energy. She soon rose to the top of the ministry's most talked about women list. A generation of Christians, particularly women who felt marginalized or ignored in the church, found resonance in her message of empowerment and deliverance. Bynum was well known by the early 2000s. Her books were charting, her events were packing stadiums, and her sermons were selling millions. This is when the exciting part begins. Juanita Bynum's adoration for luminaries such as Shirley Caesar was not unusual in those early days. A lot of followers thought their relationship was friendly and even encouraging. After all, Bynum was a member of the generation that was carrying the torch into a new era, and Caesar was a pioneer who made it possible for women to pursue careers in gospel music. However, there were rumors circulating within the gospel world that tensions were starting to build. Were there distinctions in generations? Was it a personality conflict? Juanita's audacious, occasionally contentious flair against Shirley's conventional approach? Or was it just the inevitable conflict that arises when two strong women share a sphere of influence? We do know that fans started to take notice of the two's lack of cooperation in the early 2000s. Caesar and Bynum appeared to maintain their distance from one another, in contrast to other gospel performers who frequently shared platforms, sang duets, or openly backed one another. And nobody missed this absence. People began to wonder. It seems odd that Shirley Caesar and Juanita Bynum, two ladies of their caliber, had never joined forces for a significant gospel endeavor. And the first hint is right here. Insiders claim that the foundations of Caesar's and Bynum's ministries were completely different. Caesar had decades of experience as a preacher and a performer, and he had a strong foundation in traditional church leadership. In contrast, Bynum was leading a media-driven ministry that mostly depended on big conferences, personal branding, and a sort of celebrity appeal. Although millions of people were reached by both strategies, they reflected two quite different periods of gospel culture. And according to some, the first rifts in their relationship were caused by that disparity. However, this is where the narrative takes an unexpected turn, because it wasn't only ministry style that was the issue. As Shirley Caesar would later disclose, it was intimate and more profound than anyone could have predicted. And that's when it becomes very tragic. There was a lot of conjecture in the gospel community as Juanita Bynum's fame grew quickly and Shirley Caesar's influence remained strong. The quiet between the two was unavoidable to onlookers. Fans questioned whether there was something going on behind the scenes, given their lack of connection in a field where joint ventures, performances, and public endorsements were practically required. Now, it's critical to comprehend how rumors and conjecture operate in church groups, particularly among gospel enthusiasts. Persons think there's friction when two influential persons don't appear together, don't publicly mention each other, and don't share platforms. And as the years passed, the rumors about Caesar and Bynum grew stronger. According to some admirers, Caesar was undoubtedly concerned that Juanita Bynum was deviating too far from the revered gospel music traditions. Caesar might have viewed Bynum's style, stadium-sized gatherings, mass DVD releases, audacious prophecies, and a heavily commercialized ministry as something that ran the risk of transforming religion into entertainment, because she had founded her ministry on decades of consistency, discipline, and respect for the church hierarchy. Conversely, some implied that Shirley Caesar was viewed by Juanita Bynum as a member of the old guard, the established leaders who occasionally opposed fresh perspectives and unorthodox methods. Bynum had always been vocal about wanting to forge her own path and being independent. Some questioned whether she ever thought Caesar, like many other traditional leaders, wasn't prepared to accept her unconventional approach to ministry. However, the rumors continued after that. Rumors of a direct argument between the two women started to circulate in the middle of the 2000s, thanks to gossip blogs and church insiders. Although there were rumors of behind-the-scenes interactions when words were said that allegedly left both women heartbroken, nothing was formally confirmed at the time. The media itself added another level of strain. Gospel icons like Caesar never had the same impact on headlines as Bynum as she did when her fame soared. She sold out venues, appeared on magazine covers, and was interviewed by the media. Some conjectured that the frequent analogies between Caesar and Bynum, with reporters occasionally referring to Bynum as the new queen of women in ministry, might have inadvertently stoked rivalry. Then the pivotal moment arrived. Juanita Bynum's well-known personal troubles, including her contentious divorce, financial mishaps, and public outbursts. The tone of the media changed. What started off as adoration evolved into tabloid-style reporting. Fans observed that Shirley Caesar never made any public remarks about Bynum's struggles at this time, either in support of or criticism of her. Additionally, silence speaks loudly in the gospel community. Caesar's silence was interpreted by some as an indication that she didn't want to become involved in any drama. Others interpreted it as indicative of a more profound split, demonstrating that there was never a true connection between the two. However, the majority of supporters were surprised by this turn of events. Being impartial wasn't the only reason Shirley Caesar remained silent. Years later, Caesar herself alluded to something far more intimate, connected to respect, trust, and a profound sense of betrayal, as the reason behind her choice to break off her relationship with Juanita rather than rivalry or judgment. And fans were completely taken aback when this information was ultimately made public. Fans were left in the dark for decades while they pieced together tidbits of murmurs and hearsay. However, Shirley Caesar herself ultimately made the decision to confront the matter in her own words, rather than through rumors or subliminal clues, in a rare and intensely emotional moment. Shirley Caesar, the gospel queen, revealed what many had believed but few had ever heard confirmed at the age of 65. She talked with a kind of sadness that only comes from someone who has been carrying a burden in silence for years, rather than with rage or hatred. Caesar claimed that the conflict with Juanita Bynum had nothing to do with rivalry, jealousy, or even doctrinal disagreements. Rather, it was about a broken trust, which was much more personal. Caesar clarified in her own statement that she had once shown Bynum her good intentions, She liked the younger woman's abilities to command a stage with power, her passion, and her gift of prophecy. Caesar even thought for a time that Bynum may be one of the next great gospel ministers, bringing the tradition to a new generation. However, that trust was broken at some point. Caesar disclosed that there were pledges made that were never kept, including pledges of partnership, respect, and even personal assistance. Although she never provided specifics, her words conveyed a sense of betrayal and sadness that went beyond any rumors the public had conjectured about. Caesar's disclosure is all the more potent because she refrained from attacking Bynum. In front of millions, she didn't try to destroy her or call her derogatory names. Rather, she talked about her own pain, her own sense of loss, and how she had decided to keep quiet because she felt it was more godly to be quiet than to publicly discuss personal hurts. Fans were astounded by Caesar's remarks because they exposed the type of personal conflicts that are frequently concealed behind well-rehearsed lectures and stirring worship sessions. For many, it was the first time they really realized that broken relationships, disappointment, and betrayal can happen to even gospel superstars. Caesar's admission that her silence was motivated by more than just preserving her ministry or reputation was possibly the most devastating aspect. Additionally, Juanita Bynum needed to be protected. Caesar acknowledged that she had the chance to speak up sooner and give her perspective when gossip blogs were rife, but she decided against it because she thought that revealing the truth too soon would ruin Bynum's ministry and irreversibly harm her reputation in gospel history. Take a time to imagine that. To protect someone who had, in her opinion, abused her trust, the Queen of Gospel swallowed her pride, held back her pain, and carried years of unsolved problems. Many fans were rendered stunned by that level of grace. However, Shirley Caesar didn't stop there with her confession, because she delivered a warning in the same sentence that she disclosed her sadness. She talked bluntly about the perils of putting one's own personality ahead of God's message. She described how, rather than being a genuine ministry, the gospel industry can occasionally devolve into a contest and a platform for individual celebrity. Caesar made it apparent that Bynum's narrative was about more than just her personal hurt. It was also about the larger lesson that the gospel world needed to hear, even if he did not specifically mention her by name. Since her remarks weren't solely about herself, they had weight. They served to uphold the ministry's integrity and serve as a reminder that without integrity and trust, crowds, celebrity, and titles are meaningless. However, this is when the narrative becomes even more dramatic. Shirley Caesar acknowledged that she continued to pray for Juanita Bynum in spite of the betrayal, the quiet, and the heartache. And the whole story was turned upside down by that one revelation, because fans discovered forgiveness instead of the resentment they had anticipated. Whether Caesar offered forgiveness and grace is still up for debate. Has Juanita Bynum replied yet? Did she ever try to mend the relationship, apologize, or get in touch again? The tale gets even more convoluted at that point. My friends, Juanita Bynum has been much more cautious about publicly addressing the breakup than Shirley Caesar, who eventually broke her quiet. Infinite speculation has been generated by this quiet. While some admirers think Bynum's silence says volumes, others think she did so out of respect, an oblique acknowledgement that Caesar's version of events might be accurate. We must examine Juanita Bynum's ministry in its whole throughout the years when this schism was allegedly at its height in order to gain a better understanding of this. In the early 2000s, Bynum's career was flourishing. She became well known in the Christian community, wrote best-selling books, and filled stadiums with her stirring lectures. But her ascent was accompanied by a string of public scandals, including her turbulent marriage to Bishop Thomas Weeks, the third a highly publicized domestic abuse episode, financial difficulties, and charges that she led an extravagant lifestyle that didn't align with her beliefs. These disputes only strengthened the argument among Shirley Caesar's followers that Bynum's ministry might not have had the same spiritual foundation as Caesar's. Others, however, saw it as merely evidence that Bynum was a human being, a woman chosen by God, and that she was yet vulnerable to the difficulties, temptations, and hardships that accompany being a leader under scrutiny. Here's the secret, though. Juanita Bynum never brought up the supposed disagreement with Shirley Caesar directly during all of this. Not in public pronouncements, not in sermons, not in interviews. And that quiet has been telling and deafening. According to several insiders, Bynum refrained from speaking out because she didn't want to start a public argument with a gospel icon. Others contend that her silence was more calculated and intended to prevent escalating the already existing difficulties surrounding her. After all, it could have become an even greater scandal if she had admitted to having a disagreement with Caesar. However, over the years, Bynum has subtly addressed forgiveness, treachery, and the difficulties of ministry relationships in her lectures, which admirers cannot overlook. She has frequently given sermons on people who turned away from her, about people who didn't comprehend her calling, and about the importance of continuing to move forward despite being misinterpreted. These communications appear to many to reflect the very suffering Shirley Caesar had privately acknowledged. Nevertheless, the rift, which is characterized by conjecture, hidden realities, and unanswered questions, remains an open wound in gospel history in the absence of a direct statement from Bynum. And Shirley Caesar's recent remarks struck fans particularly hard because of that unresolved tension. She finally expressed the grief after decades of keeping quiet. However, there is still mystery about Bynum's side of the incident. Thus, the last query remains in the minds of gospel devotees everywhere. When will Juanita Bynum reply? Will she accept Caesar's admission, try to make amends, or keep quiet until the conflict is quietly forgotten by history? This story is kept alive in part by that uncertainty. A reminder that not all relationships, even those between spiritual giants, are repaired, and not all wounds in the church are healed.